Today I'm going to be doing a video about the Grojsman accord. This is one of the most famous accords in modern perfumery. In this video I'm going to be giving a bit of background about the accord. I'm then going to go and actually make the accord live so you can follow along if you want. I'm going to show you how to do the dilutions firstly and then actually make the accord, make the formula. And then finally I'm going to evaluate it, let you guys know what I think. Now I do really think that this is a great accord for beginners to try, so for sure stick around and follow along if you can. Anyway, let's get into it. Okay then, so what is this Grojsman accord? Well, Sophia Grojsman, so she's a perfumer who came up with this accord. She was born in Belarus in 1945 and she went to do a degree in inorganic chemistry in Poland. And after that, she moved to America where she became a lab technician for IFF, or International Flavors and Fragrances. This is a company you may have heard of in some of my other videos. It's a really big company, one of the biggest fragrance companies in the world. Not a brand you would know, someone like Dior or Hermes, but one of the behind the scenes kind of companies that actually go and make the perfumes for a lot of these brands that you know on the high street. So anyway, then Sophia became a perfumer, and at some point in her career she developed this Hug Me accord, or this Grojsman accord as we often refer it to now. The reason for Hug Me accord is a lot of people say that this accord just makes you want to go up to someone and hug them because it smells so nice. Now this accord was used in the perfume Trésor by Lancôme, which is, I guess, the reason that it's so famous, or started becoming famous, but it's also used by a lot of other perfumers as well, and a lot of other perfumes, and it really forms the base for a lot of compositions. And one of the reasons it's so successful is that it provides this kind of linear structure to a perfume, and this is something that's really good for your kind of commercial department stores where you might sell a perfume and the customer's only got a chance to smell it once before they decide if they buy it. And what the thing is about these linear perfumes is that structure is kind of a perfume structure where the smell of the perfume stays fairly constant throughout its evolution. So instead of some perfumes which smell strongly of the top notes and then the mid notes and then the base notes, the idea with these linear perfumes is that the smell is fairly constant, and that's really good if you're selling to someone who only gets to smell it once, because you want to make sure that when they buy something, after an hour the perfume hasn't completely changed and then they don't want their money back because they think that they've been sold the wrong thing. Anyway, now let's drill down into the perfumery itself and actually take a look at what is inside this accord. So there's actually only 4 ingredients and they're all really common, so it's really quite simple. These ingredients are galaxolide, hedione, isoe super, and alpha isomethylionone. One thing that is worth mentioning, however, is it does seem the accord is quite flexible, so you can actually substitute out most of the raw materials for closely related variants of that same raw material. So for example, you could switch out hedione for hedione HC, isoe super for timber silk, and alpha isomethylionone, also called gamma ionone, for a different ionone. So if you only have, say, alpha ionone or beta ionone, or better still, some other kind of methyl ionone, it should still work and give you roughly the same effect. So a lot of places online seem to say you can use equal proportions of each of these raw materials. I did some further research, however, and I did actually manage to find the exact proportions used in that perfume Trésor by Lancôme, that famous perfume using the accord. And in that perfume, it was actually 21.4% galaxolide, 18% isoe super and the alpha isomethylionone, and then only 6% hedione, so it wasn't quite balanced in that. Anyway, what we're going to do now is I'm going to put those formulas into Formula, my perfumery app, and then we're going to use that as a reference to actually go and weigh out those raw materials and make them as samples, and then finally we're going to go and actually smell them and see what it's like. So what I'm doing here firstly is creating a new formula and then just adding all of those raw materials to it. After I've found those raw materials and added them, then I'm going to go and change the dilutions down to 10%. And the reason for that is I want to make this these trial blends of this accord in a 10% dilution. I don't want to be using pure raw materials. Now I'm just going to enter the weights. So firstly, let's start with the equal proportions version and just set everything to 0.25 grams. So that's just the same weight of everything, and then we'll make 1 gram total, which is a nice small size. But we're also going to try out the version using the proportions found in Trésor, that perfume we were talking about. So we're going to duplicate the formula to keep those raw materials, and then we're just going to change the weights. So we're going to use the same weight corresponding to the proportions in that formula. So 18 for alpha isomethylionone super, 21.4 grams for galaxolide, 6 for hedione, and 18 for isoe super. Now this is actually really large at 63.4 grams, so what we're just going to do now is scale the whole formula back down to 1 gram. At the end here, you can see it's actually scaled it to 1.001 grams. So that's just due to the rounding to 3 decimal places. So we're just going to correct that manually back down by reducing the strongest material by 0.01 grams. This basically has no effect on the formula, but it just keeps the numbers nice. Okay, so before we actually go on to doing the formula itself, we're firstly going to make some pre-dilutions of the raw materials. Now, I do have some pre-dilutions of these raw materials in the past, but I actually made them a really long time ago, almost 2 years ago. And I did think that a couple of them don't smell quite right anymore. They smell maybe slightly off, and this is just because perfumery materials do degrade over time, especially when dissolved in perfume as alcohol. So I thought I would make a fresh dilution from the pure raw materials for all of these 4 raw materials. This is exactly what you can see me doing right here. So firstly, I've taken my bottle of perfume as alcohol and emptied some of that into a clean beaker so I can just use that for pipetting. Next, I've labelled up all of my bottles for my 10% dilutions, and I've got those ready beforehand so I can just focus on the weighing out. Then we're just going to repeat the same process for each of the 4 raw materials. So what we're going to first do is take a little bit of the raw material. I like to do something like 0.5 grams, and then put that into the bottle with a pipette. After I've used that pipette, then that pipette's going in the bin because it's contaminated with that raw material. We don't want to use that same pipette for the next raw material. Then we're going to take that number, whatever it reads on the scale, so it might not be exactly 0.5, but we're going to take whatever it says and we're going to put that into the calculator. Next, we're going to times that number by 9. And the result of that calculation is going to give us the amount of perfume as alcohol that we need to add to get to a 10% dilution. So we're going to do 0.5 or whatever it said times 9, and then we're going to read that number, so it should be something like 4.5 grams thereabouts, and then we're simply going to take our pipette in the perfume as alcohol. You can reuse this pipette as long as it's only touching the perfume as alcohol. We're going to take that and we're just going to weigh out 4.5 grams into the bottle, and then afterwards we're going to close the lid, shake it up, and that's our 10% dilution. The only time that this process changes is if one of your raw materials actually starts diluted already. So in my case, the galaxolide has actually already been diluted to 50% by the supplier. So in this case, you don't want to times it by 9 because you actually need a different amount of perfume as alcohol in order to make 10% dilution. Because if you think about it, 50% is already some of the way there towards 10% from 100, so we're not going to have to add as much. In that case, we just need to times it by 4 instead of 9. If you're interested in working out how to know which number you need to times it by, just go and look up some tutorials on YouTube about how to do the maths for percentages, and after doing that, it should be pretty obvious and you should be able to work it out. Okay, so that's the dilutions. Before we move on to actually making the formulas, I'm just quickly going to smell these so I can let you guys know what they're like. So we've got our 4 things here. We've got the galaxolide. Now, to me, galaxolide is actually very difficult to smell, so when I smell that, I don't really smell much, to be honest. Sometimes I feel like I can smell it better than other times. Today is not one of those days. But in general, it does seem to be a very faint kind of musky smell. Next, we're going to move on to the hedione. I did a video about hedione maybe a month or so ago, so for sure check that out, especially if you want a much more holistic kind of opinion on what I thought about hedione. But basically, hedione is just this quite a transparent note, but it has got this kind of fatty jasmine floral aspect to it, and it has got a bit of freshness to it as well, almost a very slight citrus side to it, but for sure that's not the main thing. Next we have the alpha isomethylenone super is the one that I've got, but any gamma methylenone or alpha isomethylenone should smell pretty much the same. So this is an ionone. And this, unlike the other materials here, really has quite a strong character to it. So for this, you can really smell this kind of woodiness, this kind of raspberry-like scent. It's got that violetness to it as well. One thing that is interesting is maybe it's just slightly less powdery than some of the other ionones. It's actually a bit smoother, and I think that may be the reason that this one was chosen for this accord, because it's a very nice, quite well-rounded ionone. And this one, yeah, definitely gives the character to the accord, as I'll let you know later. Finally, we have the Isoe Super. If you've got timber silk, then that is something that's very close to this. And this smells actually kind of strong once you've got used to it, but it's not crazy strong or anything. And it's this kind of, I would say, woody, kind of almost this lacquer kind of smell. It's this kind of woody, it's like some aspect to some wood, but it's not the full wood itself, but it's also got this slight ambery side to it. So a lot of people call this a woody amber, and for sure you could say that this is a woody amber. But anyway, on their own, none of these smell absolutely kind of eye-popping, you know. They all smell pretty good. I mean, apart from the galaxolide, which, as I say, I have trouble with. But they all smell very subtle for sure, and they all do kind of smell like quite separate things with their own characters. Finally, we're actually going to go and make the formula itself. So at this stage, it's really easy because we've already done all the work. All we're going to do is going to take some fresh bottles and we're going to label those so we know which one is the equal proportions version of the formula and which one is the Trésor version of the formula. Then I'm just going to bring up those formulas from earlier on the iPad, which have now been scaled down to 1 gram. So I know that we're going to make a small but not too small amount of the formula. Then we're just going to take some fresh pipettes and we're going to go one by one through our pre-diluted materials and weigh them out. What I like to do in this situation where we've got two variants of the same things is go through my raw materials, my pre-diluted raw materials, and for each one I'll firstly take a fresh pipette and then I'll go through the accords or the different variations and weigh out the amount needed for each one. So I'll take the pipette, weigh it out into, say, the equal proportions version of the accord, and then using that same pipette I'll go and weigh out how much is needed for the Trésor version. Once that's done, I'll take that pipette and put it in the waste, and then I'll go and get the next pre-diluted raw material. I'll take a new pipette for that, and then use that pipette to weigh out that same raw material for both of the different variations. That way it just helps minimize a bit the amount of pipettes that you use. Some people do like to keep pipettes for longer. I have done this in the past as well. At the moment I'm not doing it so much, but for sure it is an option. But you have to realize if you're doing that, you need to be really careful to keep them from being contaminated. And you also have to realize that it's going to make your workspace smell of your raw materials, so you might want to seal them inside of something as well to stop that happening so much. Also, I wouldn't recommend reusing the same pipette forever, maybe just for a few weeks or something, but I wouldn't keep it for like a year or something like that. Okay, so now we've got these two formulas, let's go and actually see what they smell like. So I'm going to start off with the one from Trésor, those proportions used in that perfume. And when I smell this, what I smell is, for sure, I do get that warm, comforting vibe that it's meant to give off, this hug me vibe. For sure you can notice this. Now, one thing that I do notice is the iron, the kind of raspberry side of things, really does stick out. But another thing that I find quite interesting is I think this smells a lot closer to rose, or at least a little bit closer. For sure, it brings out this rose side of the iron that I didn't really smell so much when it was just on its own. And for sure, that's something I find quite interesting. And secondly, there's something about this. So when you smell this, you do think, oh, mostly it just does smell of that alpha isomethyl But then when you go back and you actually smell, when you smell the alpha isomethyl on its own, suddenly afterwards, this just smells so flat. It just smells like, yeah, it's got that character. But when you go back and smell this, suddenly you get that kind of massive enveloping whole thing. It's really kind of just comfy, you know. And I think that's the whole thing that this accord is about. It's having this really general, just kind of like fuzzy, kind of warm smell. And it's quite subtle, the effects, but for sure, when you actually go and smell it for yourself, you really do notice it. What I would kind of liken it to is a bit like that ironone in here. For me, that's a bit like this kind of purple color. It gives you that violet kind of raspberry scent. But when it's on its own, it's just that kind of flat color, as if you just painted a wall. What everything else seems to do to me in the accord, so the Isoe Super, the Hedione, the Galaxolide, when they come together, they seem to make this kind of soft, like cloud, like this kind of pillow. And when you put them all together in this accord, the image I get is more, instead of this just flat kind of lilac purple color, you get this kind of really plush, kind of fuzzy, kind of comfy, silky purple pillow. And I think that is what the accord is doing here. It's just getting that smell and it's kind of pumping it up and making it really like a cloud, really nice and soft and fuzzy. So for sure, this accord, it's something I would recommend you try out, actually, because it's something that you can actually kind of smell in perfumes on the street. You know, when you walk by people and sometimes you get a whiff of their perfume. This for sure is a smell that I think you would kind of recognize out and about. And for that reason, I think it's a really good one to try, because it really kind of puts that perfumery into kind of a real context for you. And I think that's nice sometimes when you can actually smell something out in the world and then come back home and make something that's quite similar. Then you can actually start to feel kind of quite happy, right? Like, hey, I'm actually making some proper perfume here, not just some random stuff that I mixed up. So yeah, this version of the Accord I really do like. Now we also do have the other version, which is the equal proportions. Now, when I smell this, it really is very close to that Trésor version. There's not much difference between the two. To me, I do think this version with the increased headion, because that's the main difference, it for sure does shout a little bit louder, but I also think it's not quite so soft and velvety. But I do think depending on what kind of perfume you want to make, either one could work. And I think that is one of the things that makes this Accord so good. It just does feel like it's so flexible. It does feel like such a kind of a base to build on top of, rather than this massive Accord that wants to make your perfume smell like a certain thing. For sure, it does give your perfume that kind of fruity, raspberry, rose, woody, ambery, that kind of scent, but I still think that you could use it in so many contexts, and I guess now after smelling it I can kind of see how it could be used in so many different things. For example, in Trésor by Lancôme, I haven't actually smelled the perfume, but I read the smelling notes online and it said it has pineapple in, peaches, and notes of sandalwood, things like that. So I can kind of get this idea that this Grojsman Accord would be really good as a generic base, or it seems like that is what's happening for a lot of perfumes, but then you can kind of go and tweak it how you want to actually give it its character, and I guess that's why it works so well. So in that case, maybe you take some pineapple and put it in, but I guess we could equally go and find something else, like we could probably just get some strawberry and put that on the end, or maybe we could just think up something else entirely, maybe even something fresh like some cologne. I have no idea. But I think this is probably the next thing to try out. So in this video, I don't have time this week to actually go and try out more of those, but maybe in a future video, especially if you guys are interested, for sure this is something that I think would be cool to experiment with, because now I've got the base Accord, I kind of get an idea for what this Grojsman Accord smells like. I think the next step would be to actually go and explore it a bit more and try to make variations of it and see how it behaves and see how flexible it actually is. So if you have any suggestions for things that I might be able to do with this Accord, be sure to leave those in the comments. For sure I'll consider those when I'm looking, hopefully sometime soon, over what I can actually do with this Accord, and maybe we will develop it further in a future video. I'm not 100% sure yet, but for sure it's on the cards. Anyway, that's it for this video, so please do give the video a like if you liked it, and also consider subscribing if you want to see more videos like this. And apart from that, hope to see you next time with some more perfumery stuff, so stay tuned and see you soon.